Hello everyone, Mahojo here. So a lot has been happening in politics over the past like 3 weeks, and I guess over the past week alone. So obviously Donald Trump got shot, didn't he? I don't know if you're just hearing about this now, but yeah, there's assassination attempt against Donald Trump. I did not predict that anything like that might happen, actually. I really should have seen that coming. I'll factor that in next election, next time around. Okay, it's way too dark in here for the camera. Oh no, it isn't. But yeah, I don't really have much analysis about that. I haven't really got much to say. Might be a bit dark in here, but the thing is, one thing that I did expect to happen here, and I actually predicted it in this very park that I'm walking around the shadows of right now, predicted about a week ago actually, that Joe Biden might get some sort of cold or illness. And obviously a few days after Trump got shot, it also came out that the other candidate, Joe Biden, in the US general election, is sick with COVID. And I said last video about his age thing. Yeah, okay, there's obviously been a lot of media attention on Joe Biden's age, and that could affect him, you know, like he has a stroke. I mean, mostly people are thinking about his actual condition of being able to speak and not get confused about important things when you're leading a country. They just want about that in the moment confusion, the general lack of condition that comes with being old. The thing is though, that puts you at risk of ignoring the other factors that come with age, which I haven't heard really discussed, which is obviously things like he could just have a stroke, he could just have a heart attack, something sudden like that, innit? Obviously it's quite icky to talk about, but that's the situation we're in. It's an icky situation. And also other things that are a lot more likely, maybe less severe, but are still very severe at that age, which is kind of the point, is catching something. If you're on the campaign trail, if you're, I said this a week ago, if you're touching hands and going up against thousands of people every week on the campaign trail, especially if your immune system isn't as good as it used to be, you're more likely to get sick. And this has obviously happened, and there's every chance that this will happen again in a few weeks, where Joe has had to take a few days off campaigning while he's isolating. So that's time wasted. He's also, as I said in that video, the sad thing is when you get above a certain age, a lot of the time what happens is you'll get a lot of these illnesses that someone else might get, and it's just a temporary thing. Once they're not sick anymore, they just get over it. But once you get past a certain age, towards the end of your life, if you get something, if you get an illness, the chances are that will permanently make your condition worse. That will permanently age you. You might have seen this in like an elderly relative you have, where they'll get the flu or something, or they'll just get a cold when they're really old, but it actually permanently damages them. It's probably going to happen to Biden. He's probably going to get even more confused. The campaign is only just ramping up really from the Biden side, so he's going to be more busy. His schedule as the US president, which is already extremely packed, is going to be more packed, because he's going to be and he did talk about his schedule and said that he has not made any adjustments. He's got no signs of slowing down. He refuses to slow down. He's going to be doing campaign events presumably every day, or at least every other day, and his brain is just going to melt more than it has already, and it's just going to cook. So yeah, I mean, not much to say that I can add that 1,000 other people haven't said about the Trump thing. What could I even say? I mean, nothing I can really say about that. But one thing that is more interesting, and there's more really to say about really, is Joe getting sick, because this is the more realistic thing. Obviously the meme version of this is, you know, oh, he's gonna have a stroke, he's gonna have an aneurysm tomorrow. And the thing is, obviously, even though it is sad that is genuinely a realistic thing, that's not entirely unserious. Obviously the much more likely scenario is more minor things like this, less, you know, dramatic things where he might fall over. There's generally probably more than a 50% chance on my end, just how I'm feeling it, more than a 50% chance that he's going to have another fall before the US election. So there's that, like falling, getting colds, stuff like that is the more likely manifestation of his age, like really causing like bad problems and like the aging accelerating in terms of risks to his health. So those are basically the two main things. Obviously there's some UK stuff going on. I better talk about that. One good thing that you can say for Biden, though, is that at the end of this month, July, the US Fed, the Federal Reserve, the people who control their monetary policy, are almost definitely going to lower interest rates. And interest rates, that means, you know, mortgage interest rates for people with variable rate mortgages or fees on their mortgage. And obviously, you've all heard about, there's been high inflation recently, not just in any particular country, across the world. And obviously, the main way that they combat this in a capitalist system is by raising interest rates, which basically all that does is directly making people's lives worse, making sure homeowners have less money, so that people are less incentivized to spend money. So that there's less money cycling around the system, which means businesses are less incentivized to put prices up because less stuff is being brought. There's more stock that's sort of left loose, which will slightly decrease prices, you know, supply and demand and all that. But lowering these mortgage rates then, after you've dealt with the inflation, is how sort of the recovery starts. It's the mainstream way of having an economic recovery after you've had a period of high inflation or of low economic growth. You cut the interest rates, and now homeowners, who will make up the bulk of your work. Look at those flowers, by the way, very nice. Don't come up very well on the camera, but nice flowers. Sorry, just distracted. But it's great stuff on this park. But those homeowners who will make up one of the big driving forces of your economy, because, you know, you're not going to be middle. I mean, maybe you're coming up to the point where if you own a house, you know, you're middle class. But as of right now, that's not the case. But you're probably not going to be like particularly poor. You know what I mean? You're probably going to have a bit of money knocking around if you own a house, if you have a mortgage. So if those people's rates go down, if the amount that they have to pay per month to upkeep their house goes down, they'll have more money, and then this will stimulate the economy more. People will buy more things. It'll be, you know, there'll be more credit. Okay, how's that work again as well? Hold on. I think also it will allow the banks to leverage more against their mortgage, because it'll mean the banks have to pay less fees. I think if the mortgage is less expensive, that benefits banks as well, so they can invest on the back end. So on the front end, the actual mortgage holder themselves has more money to spend as a consumer, but on the back end, as an investor, the bank also gets a bit out of that. And that's what they don't really talk about. Whenever they talk about it in simple terms, like on regular ITV news, they'll just talk about it as if it's the mortgage holder, the citizen themselves. But a big thing that lowering mortgage rates does is it makes it less expensive for the bank as well. And that's where a big bulk of it actually comes from, because, as you know, more investment is put into businesses in the UK, obviously the economy will grow. That's why when you cut mortgage rates, stuff goes up. But that's almost definitely going to happen for the US Federal Reserve, and also almost definitely going to happen in the UK. We've got the Bank of England. So there's two big and two close economies in the West that are lowering interest rates for the first time. What, 1, 2, 3 years? I can't remember the specific things. I think for England, it's over. I think it's June 2023, something like that. It's around the year. I'm not sure about America, but we have very high interest rates in the UK. In America, I think it's only 3.75 or something, and for us, it was 5.25. So yeah, that's a long time coming. And because inflation seems to be low and staying low, and actually, you know, seeming to get quite a bit lower quite quickly, there will probably be successive mortgage rate cuts. I think that there'll be one in July in England, July in America, and then more likely one in America in August as well, at the end of August, because they decide it on the 30th, around the 30th of the month in America. More likely one in August, at the end of August in America as well. So that'll bring it down. And then obviously inflation will go up a little bit, but I think they've got it under control enough now where most of that energy will just go into growing the economy. And obviously growing the American economy pretty significantly, like a few months before the election, but, you know, with enough time that people will feel the effects at least a little bit, obviously bodes very well for the incumbent. And Biden obviously the Democrats know this, because for everything I've seen, all the public appearances he's made, he's constantly hammering on about the economic aspect of it. He doesn't want to talk about anything. He doesn't want to talk about foreign policy. Trust me, Joe Biden does not want to talk about foreign policy because, you know, genocide Joe and all that. But the main thing he always wants to bring it back to, whenever he dodges a question with an interview, whenever he was arguing, even on that terrible debate, even if you watch that, like when he was arguing with Trump, he'd always want to bring it back to the economic aspect. That's because they know that the trajectory is really good. So maybe his Hail Mary, his last saving grace, will be this last boost of the economies in America, and also probably in the UK, where living standards in general will start to get better in the middle and the late part of this year. So that could bode well for him. But yeah, crazy week. Oh, and I did just remember another light at the end of the tunnel for Biden. It is starting to get a bit dusk now. Is the fact that Donald Trump picked JD Vance as his vice president. Now, if you haven't heard of JD Vance is before this, it's not just because, you know, you're not into politics or whatever. He is quite unrecognizable unless you're online a lot and doing online politics. So he basically has very little conventional political experience. He's been in Congress since 2022, so less than 2 years. He's not really a politician. He wrote a book about his your hillbilly working class upbringing. That's not me saying hillbilly, that's the title of it. It's called the Hillbilly Elegy, so he uses that himself. He did have a hillbilly upbringing, and basically he's a far right wacko. He believes in a lot of conspiracy theories. He has very little favour or very little recognisability with the traditional boomer, neocon, you know, pretty socially right-wing, but mostly economically right-wing. You know, you want to be a right-wing dickhead. You know, you want to grill and have low taxes, and, you know, have guns and not have abortions. That's the Republican way. But even that, you know, even the moderate Republicans are slightly moving off of abortion now. Like, ever since Roe v. Wade was repealed, it's actually become quite obvious how unpopular an abortion ban is. But that's by the by. You see my point. But JD Vance is not catering to that traditional boomer, maybe a little bit bigoted, maybe a little bit dumb. But, you know, they're not like crazy evil people. He's not catering to that audience. He is catering to the increasingly growing, explicitly far right, explicitly, you know, white nationalist, Nazi, whatever, like those wacky people, the increasing vaccine conspiracy. He's part of all that stuff. He's catering to that base. It's not really clear why Trump did this. So unless there is some sort of super practical reason here, let's say that this is a mistake, that it's not tactically very good for Trump to have JD Vance as his pick. But can we at least look into why he might have done this? Well, one big thing is that I think this, instead of being seen more as a blunder sort of mistake, it's more just sort of a natural part of where the Republican Party is going. So there are stages in fascism, there are stages of widening the base where you will water down your takes a lot. You see this all over the place. You know, people will be very flip-floppy on their policy positions. They'll try and use progressive language, you know, virtue signaling, or is it virtue signaling? No, what's that thing? Oh, they'll use identity politics language to appeal to basically groups that they hate. Because in a modern country, especially a country as diverse as America, it's very hard to be openly fascist at first sight. So you have to kind of pretend to include all the groups that you hate in your coalition, which is a very tricky situation to be in. And then obviously what you're seeing now is a second stage, or a phase to it, of consolidation. The thing is, if someone's a fascist, it's all well and good to win all these elections and become really popular because of all these lies you're telling, lying to people about your beliefs. But at some point, they're gonna want to start putting people on trains and, you know, start purging institutions of those disloyal to them. At some point, you're going to have to consolidate, where you go from expanding your base to contracting it again, and hopefully when you contract, you can lose as little people as possible, so you're left with a power base and institutions, and sort of a sphere of influence that is hopefully a lot bigger than when you started off, but because of that consolidation, now you control it better. You know, this is authoritarianism 101. So I feel like what's happening right now is an effort at consolidation in the Republican Party, and almost like simultaneous consolidation and expansion. Now, this might feel a little bit contradictory considering what I've just said, but I feel like the efforts at expansion are more to sort of mitigate the true consolidation. It's trying to sort of delay the effects of the consolidation, because obviously, so I think what's going on here is that JD Vance is someone who is more aligned to the direction that the Republican Party is actually going, someone who is probably very bigoted in quite a few ways, take your pick of ways in which he may be bigoted, and is just a bit mental. That is the direction the Republican Party wants to go to, but obviously, as much as people joke, the majority of their base is not actually mental. So JD Vance isn't a pick to help impress people and to help win over a demographic that you might not have gotten before if you're a Republican politician. JD Vance is a more real pick. He's a more genuine pick to represent what a Republican at the center of this MAGA sphere might actually want. He's the guy that would be putting people on trains, or at least making the orders and making the plans to put people on trains and to do the crackdowns and to do, you know, purges of institutions. I've talked about Project 2025 before. That's going to happen in 2025 if the Republicans win, and I'm sure JD Vance will be a big part of that. A lot of stuff that Project 2025 do, as you know, is very undemocratic, basically flooding the administrative state and all other institutions in America with thousands and thousands and thousands of just brute force picked loyalists, where they've just done this process of hiring as many people as possible, well, they're going to do it, and replacing anyone, not even important people, not even people in particular positions of power. I mean literally like normal workers or mid-level workers in just institutions everywhere in America, you name it, you know, like agriculture, medicine, forestry, vaccine stuff, transport, infrastructure, aerospace, anything. He wants it all to be loyalists. So, and I've got to be honest with you, I haven't read the full Project 2025 document yet. I haven't read the full released plan, but I do hear that a lot of the other changes, because there's more to it than that, but a lot of the other changes that would be made in the plan would actually be illegal. So you need to find someone, if you're the president, you need to surround yourself with people in your cabinet and in your inner circle who would not have those sorts of qualms about the legality or about the morality of what you're going to do. Hence JD Vance. So that might explain why this has happened, even if in the short term and in this aspect maybe you have to switch the way you look at things. And I feel like a lot of people, a lot of commentators are going to have to switch the way they think about the Republican Party for stuff to start to make sense, because it doesn't make sense in terms of the expansion, but if you think about it in terms of consolidation, it does make sense. So people were very surprised. You might have seen on like mainstream news, a lot of people in America were quite surprised that he picked JD Vance. But if you start looking at it in this new lens of they're not expanding anymore, they're partially starting to consolidate, then it makes sense. Also, to give a bit more detail on this, the person behind this, the actual brains, might have been this fella Peter Thiel. You might have heard of him. He's a billionaire, he's a big donor, evil guy, all around horrible guy. He's the sort of guy who would be the villain in a Nickelodeon original movie. He's just a comically evil businessman, that's him. And he has been acquaintances, I don't want to say friends, I don't know if he's capable of making friends, but he's been associated with JD Vance for quite a few years. And oh, dead hedgehog, nice. So is Trump. So they have a mutual friendship with Peter Thiel that links them. So apparently Peter Thiel was the one who personally convinced Trump and won him round in the final degree to get him to pick JD Vance. And you know, I can say a lot of things about Peter Thiel, but he does seem quite calculated, quite thoughtful. He's one of those guys. He's like this cowardly sort of mastermind. He's one of these like proper string pullers. You know, like whenever people talk about, oh, the shady donors who control politicians, he is literally one of those guys. But the thing is, he's very considered about it. So this idea, I'm thinking that the idea itself may have come from Peter Thiel, and almost the sole reason that he is the vice president, or sorry, the vice presidential pick, the candidate, is because of Peter Thiel seeing the need for consolidation. Probably talked to a lot of his other nerd donor buddies, nerd fascist buddies, and they've decided, probably amongst themselves, okay, we've pandered too much, we need to start consolidating. Or, if you can get away with it, do both at the same time. And this brings me on to the next bit. There was the Republican National Convention a few days ago. As I say, it's been a busy week. Trump was shot, Biden got COVID. There was the Republican National Convention, which went on for 3 days. I think it ended yesterday. Yesterday was the last day. And despite this consolidation, basically all of what they were doing at the Republican National Convention seemed to be, for want of a better word, diversity pandering. It was quite transparent. They're not very good at doing it because they're conservatives. They don't know how to naturally just have diversity. So, and quite an unbelievable amount of different demographics and prevalence of different demographics, you know, racial, you know, sexual, stuff like that. I think there was a trans person there or something. There was an awful lot of demographic diversity at the Republican National Convention, and it's not the same as, yeah, obviously they'd always have, you know, the token black guy to come out and say, see, Republicans aren't racist, and everyone would clap. But this, genuinely, I heard from the 538 podcast, I think this was, so if this is wrong, it's their fault, because again, it goes on for 3 days, but apparently about 60%, the majority of speakers at the convention were black. Genuinely, the majority. And if not, just in the clips that I saw, because obviously I couldn't watch all of it, but in the clips that I saw, there were an awful lot, a disproportionate amount of black speakers, Hispanic speakers. There's a lot of women. There was, who's that girl? Amber Rose or something. She is like an outspoken, extremely outspoken feminist. So she has been the target of the right wing for a long time, because she's the classic, like, a lot of times she has short hair, she's very made up, very modern girl. I think, you know, she's had a lot of partners. I can't remember what her actual job is though. Like, is she a model? Is she a singer? I think she's a model, but I think also she might do some like OnlyFans stuff or whatever. So basically, someone that they want to burn at the stake, and she was speaking at the convention. I need to put her name in the description, but it was crazy. And there was a gay guy up there saying, oh, it's fine to be gay, and it's fine to be gay if you're a Republican. You know, it was a whole cheese board of people. But yeah, like, so that was one thing. And I think that on the surface levels, they're ramping up the efforts at expansion to sort of paper over the cracks of the deeper consolidation. So JD Vance being picked as vice president, it's more substantial. It's more substantial because obviously he's an actual politician, but also think about the age. I mean, people talk about Joe Biden's age, but Big Don, 78, if they're serious about this, fascist plan, and it takes off, Trump isn't going to be around to show for it forever. And this is a problem that the right in America has had for quite a few years, that the fact that Trump isn't the right sort of person anyway to actually usher in a fascist coup. Like, again, he's the guy for the expansion. He's the firebrand. He's the popular guy. He's the guy that has that charisma. You know, he has this weird effect on people. He's the blunt force instrument. That's what he's for. He's to get people energized up, galvanized, get them to the polls. But it's a very distinct second phase with fascism. This is important. You should listen to this. You need to switch, because very, very often the sort of people who do stuff like that aren't the sort of people who can have the agency of mind and the patience and the academic intellect and the nerdiness and, frankly, the evilness and the coldness to actually sit down and plan, you know, crackdowns, big authoritarian, you know, crackdowns, genocides, which is probably what you're going to start talking about if you get into this ideologically extreme fascist, you know, nightmare. You probably would have genocides that needed to be planning. Obviously not needed, but you know what I mean, needed from their perspective. And the massive drop in working conditions, because obviously democracy, even though it doesn't do a very good job, it does to some extent protect the workers from literally just getting exploited to kingdom come. If there was no protection and it was literally just a fascist dictatorship ran by businessmen, America would just become like a Dickensian novel. Destitution and poverty would skyrocket. And you need people who have the right sort of personalities to plan and execute all this stuff. Donald Trump is not the right guy for that. He is not patient enough. He is not controllable enough to execute such a risky and frankly quite hard plan in the 21st century. He doesn't have the patience. I also genuinely believe he's not evil enough. So he's evil in the way that he's narcissistic and a little bit megalomaniacal. Trump, he loves applause, he loves having the power, he loves being the big guy. He goes out there, that's what he does it for. He does it for the glory and the power itself. He loves it when people clap for him, he loves being loved. That's the sort of guy he is. When I say it like that, it's almost sort of, you know, with rose-tinted glasses. And the reason I took on that tone, unintentionally, is probably because of what I'm about to say next. Compare that to someone like Ron DeSantis, to someone like JD Vance, to someone like Hitler, where Trump, think about him, like think about Trump. He's the clown, isn't he? I do not believe, maybe this is just me being caught up in his riz, you know, maybe I've gone into the Trump vortex, but I do not believe his heart is in it and his intentions are in it in the specific place where he would actually go through with some sort of big genocide. In this country, obviously, a foreign genocide, I don't care about that, but and a genocide in America, whether it be trans people, gay people, or whatever, illegal immigrants, whatever they can use to stoke up the fervour enough to keep the government going, because that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? I just don't think that's why he's in it. His heart would not be in it for that. Why would he want that? Does that sound like Trump to you? Anything you know about his motivations or what he's like, over, you know, him being one of the most famous people in the world for the past 8 years, does that strike you as Trump? Like, does Trump strike you as the type of guy who actually wakes up and in his mind he is fully committed to that? Like, he is ideologically genuinely like, oh, he hates trans people, or like he actually wants them dead? Like, do you think he wakes up and in his heart like really like hates certain groups enough to want them dead in the same way that a fascist does? Like, I don't think he does. I really don't get that impression from him. Everything we know about him and everything that indicates why he's doing this doesn't seem like he's in it because of an actual thought through, like, malicious, calculated plan to do a fascist takeover. I feel like he will do initially whatever gets him enough applause and enough attention, but right now he will do whatever it takes to keep him out of prison and to keep him from going broke, because obviously of all these trials and stuff. So right now, because he's a and it might sound silly, but genuinely this is how a narcissist is, this is how they act. If he is a narcissist, which he is, he genuinely is prepared to get rid of democracy in America, just end it and start fascism in the world's most powerful country in order to not go to jail. That is the crux of why he's doing this. That's why he's still here. So he doesn't go to jail and he doesn't lose all of his money. And that alone will be the motivation and will be the reason that America falls to fascism, if it does, in the aftermath of this election. That's genuinely it. It sounds silly, but that's what narcissists are like. That's why he's in it. You need someone else. You need a different approach. You need a different type of person to take it forward once you start to consolidate and once you've got, like, wherever you need to get. So I feel like there's a potential sort of fantasy here for those you know, RNC psychos, where after Trump retires or dies, JD Vance would actually take up the mantle and be the president. And even though he's got nowhere near the charisma or other aspects that Trump has, he has that momentum. He has the inherited reputation, and maybe even he would actually inherit it, where Trump would give him the blessing and say, take on the mantle, and then JD Vance would become the president, or whatever it would be by that point. Might not even be a president, might be a bloody Führer or whatever, but he would take on that mantle probably. So maybe that explains why this vice presidential pick is, and it speaks to the fact it's going to be very interesting to see the Republicans try and balance the consolidation that they want to do to actually go ahead with what they need to do and do it in time for this election, so that they will actually be able to, if they win, as soon as they get on it, you know, execute the radical things they need to execute or want to execute. So it's going to be interesting seeing them balance that with trying to maintain the popularity of broader demographics that they hate. Hence the RNC stuff of pushing everyone up there, every type of person you could get, including even a union rep. The Teamsters Union, right, which is one of the biggest unions in America. I can't really see my face here, come on. So this guy, who was thought to be a massive advocate of the working class, he's an aggressive union rep, even coming to threatening to fight Republican politicians when he was addressing a certain state house. I can't remember which house it was, but literally threatening to come to blows with politicians over matters of worker conditions. And he's this really aggressive advocate for you know, certain policies and the interests of the Teamsters Union. But the thing is, this guy, this traitor, came and spoke positively at the RNC, when obviously they have made no reported, at least, maybe they're secret policy concessions, but they've made no public policy concessions to indicate at all that they're even going to pretend to do anything for the Teamsters or workers like the Teamsters. If you don't know the Teamsters, it's kind of loose, but a lot of it is to do with truck drivers and transport and infrastructure. They're kind of like, a lot of them are very important sectors, like almost like the industrial backbone. Like a lot of it is to do with infrastructure, train drivers, truck drivers, stuff like that. And funny thing, I don't know if you've seen The Irishman, but Jimmy Hoffa, if you've heard the name Teamsters before, you're like, what's that from? You might have heard it from The Irishman, that film. Jimmy Hoffa, played by Al Pacino excellently, was now I guess now you can say that he's the second most slimy head of the Teamsters. Yeah, because he literally, obviously based on a true story, isn't it? Jimmy Hoffa was kind of a gangster. He wasn't in the mafia, but he was like a criminal. He was an organised criminal who rose to the top of this big union. And obviously unions were a lot bigger in the 60s and 70s, so I believe there was a few million members of the Teamsters, and obviously because you can call people out on strike, kind of, you hold a lot of power then. So he had an awful lot of power, an awful lot of sway in America, and he basically used it to enrich himself and, you know, get power, as gangsters do. But yeah, I guess now you can say that he is famous for being the second most slimy, treacherous head of the Teamsters Union, because he was just doing all this both sides rhetoric of like, oh, Democrats and Republicans, you know, both parties have been getting us down. He didn't even say that, because then that would require him to, you know, disparage the Republicans. But he just got up there and just talked about like unity and like collaborating for the workers, just vague bullshit politician stuff. So funny, because he thinks he's so sick, like whenever he used to make a point of like talking bluntly and talking very concretely about the facts, he used to really make a point about that, like, oh, look at me, I'm not like a politician, I'm a no-nonsense union leader. As soon as he got up on that stage, because he had nothing good to say, because he's a weasel, he just started doing that exact same politician speak, because the RNC obviously don't have anything, any ideas, any policies, any plans to make things better for union men, especially the Teamsters. So I don't know if they've just slid him any money under the table, or they've reincarnated the ghost of Jimmy Hoffa to convince him to take a bribe. But like, I don't know if they'd even need him. But yeah, basically just treachery, actual betrayal from the head of one of the biggest unions in America. And one of the most well-known unions again, probably for the wrong reasons, but I guess this is just yet another dark stain on their reputation, and I hope it goes down in sort of a similar sort of way, with a similar sort of reputation to Jimmy Hoffa, using it basically to fund and fuel his gangster empire. Because this is almost worse, I'd say. I think there's an argument to be made that that's worse in an election in the most powerful country in the world, where there is a realistic, and some may say above 50% chance of a fascist takeover happening of the most powerful country in the world, and you go and speak at their convention before the election when they have made no concessions, no guarantees, no indications towards the working class or towards your union, and just getting your voice out there for the sake of it, not pushing any specific messages, not asking for anything, not asking for any policies, just getting up there and waffling about unity and, you know, both parties need to come together and, you know, fight for the workers. But there's nothing. The Republicans hate them. They hate the workers. They hate the Teamsters, the actual Teamsters, the labourers, the truck drivers. They hate them. They want them dead. The head of the union, well, maybe not the head, because he's kind of one of them now, isn't he? But the union leaders are literally one of the first groups that they would kill in a purge. They would actually kill them. And he's up there speaking at the convention. You are diametrically opposed to the interests of the Republican Party, and more specifically the RNC. They hate you. They hate the rights of workers. As a union leader, as a union advocate, you should be mortally, diametrically opposed to the interests of the RNC. You are their worst enemy, and he's up there just giving this both sides happy, we're all friends here speech. Actual treachery. One of the worst betrayals in the history of organised labour. So obviously he was invited. I doubt he gate crashed it, but I wouldn't put it past him. So that is a very obvious, very transparent effort to still try and keep their base broad, and even going into new territory, because they didn't even do that. Obviously they do all the social stuff with the racial stuff and trying to get more women on board, but they would very, very rarely pander to unions or even say the word union. This is why that was another pretty shocking thing. But I guess both of them are shocking. If you notice that, if you've been looking at mainstream news, you might have noticed both the JD Vance thing and the thing about the union rep, although you're less likely to have seen that, both of them were shocking. But that's because they're kind of balancing each other out, where they had to do something shocking to appeal to people and to be populist, and then they had to do something shocking that was practical in order to do what they actually want to do. So him speaking at the RNC was basically a counterbalance to the consolidation. And I guess you could say, oh well, if they're doing both, how do you know which direction they're moving in? Well, I guess it's quite coincidental that this is happening before the election, because obviously they've got a deadline where they want to have all their ducks in a row. They want to have the right people in the right places and the right infrastructure and the right resources in the right places to take over once the election is won. So that's a big reason why to be consolidating now, because it's the right time. It's that simple. But also, you know, that because, as I say, these things are more superficial. They're more matters of representation. Again, the whole point, as what I was saying, is it was just union representation, but it wasn't meaningful representation because they didn't do anything and he didn't say anything, didn't ask for anything. And again, they get all these black people up there, get these gay people up there, but obviously their intellectual core, the ideological core of the Republican Party and the real centre of power, a lot of them hate those groups. And it doesn't actually mean anything. It's nothing about this is substantial. It's not a policy change, it's not a personnel change, it's not a diversion of resources, but the JD Vance thing is substantial. So they're moving into a period of consolidation here, and I wonder whether they're going to, because they assume Biden is behind, which again, polling is hard, and even though he's doing really badly, you can't say with high confidence that he's behind. But because the Republicans are presuming that he is behind, I wonder how many more steps of this consolidation they're going to do to make their plans easier to execute in a practical sense. And I also wonder how much that will negatively affect the populist side of things, where, you know, actually keeping the vote. Because, you know, the Hail Mary, one of the last hopes for Biden, and, you know, one of the unforced errors that the Republicans could make, and if they're really lucky, if the Democrats are really lucky, is that they just go too far with the consolidation before they've even won the election, and then they end up losing it narrowly. And all this stuff that's happening with Biden in his age, obviously it hasn't just worn off over a week or two, but it is starting to wear off. The polls are starting to narrow again. So their sort of nightmare scenario is that they keep doing this, and they turn around, and in 4 weeks, 8 weeks time, Biden's recovered because the economy's on the up. You know, this whole thing about his age, you know, let's say maybe it's more of a trend, maybe it's not a permanent thing that's going to get worse. Maybe I'm wrong in my last video, maybe it doesn't just get worse. Maybe this whole fervor about his age peters out a little bit, and then the Republicans are left with a much less popular, much more radical party fighting a slightly more competent Democratic White House. So there's your last chance saloon. Obviously the most surface things still look like Biden's behind, and it's going very well for Biden, but there are a couple new things. It's starting to swing back again, the pendulum's starting to swing back again. There's a couple new things creeping in that seem like, in a practical sense and in a long-term sense, actually looking forward to how this election is going to go, it'd actually be worse for the Republicans. So maybe I'll update my estimate. Last time I said I was down in the dumps, and I was after the terrible debate, I was really down in the dumps, and I was like, 60-40 Trump. That was my prediction last time. I'm going to update my prediction to 55 to 45 to Trump, which is maybe what I would have put it to last time, because I was only slightly edging Trump above, ahead of Biden there. But 60-40, it sounds really close, but it's actually, the 60 is a lot bigger than the 40, so I probably should have done 55-45 last time, but there you go, 55-45 to Trump, getting slightly better for Biden.